All right, welcome back to Comic Talk. Today's topic will be that of super speed. And if you thought superhuman strength had some issues, there are definitely quite a bit of other issues with the speed element. I mean, one thing you always have to say, probably everyone has experienced is they try to go for a run or even a simple jog, and then after a very brief amount of time, they feel tired, they can't really do much, there's too much pain, and if the body hurts, don't, try to push through it a little bit. And if there's a way to basically kind of make it stop, quickly and then, take a breather, that's when you do it and you can keep going for a while, but until you hurt again, that's not, yeah, like I said, that's actually safer thing than rather just, forcing it all at once and then, you pass out from total exhaustion. It'd be almost kind of like, um, like I said, wearing down the batteries of some said in a toy that seems to just drain everything very quickly, and you don't have access to anything fancier than generic batteries. So, I mean, the closest thing most people might be able to get, the closest things might involve superhuman speed are going on, is if you can go on skates, the wheels will definitely push you a lot faster. If you run downhill, just the fact that you're able to you're not fighting gravity as much. You can run a lot faster, but there is a good chance you might crash if what if the downhill is too much, uneven terrain, or there's just someone being a jerk that gets in your way. Now, I'm not exactly too proud of this, but I actually found out that if you went to an airport and go to an airport and you just stand, said on the moving sidewalk, it's not really going to be, you're not really going to go anywhere. They said if you walk, actually with it going, it actually gives you 4 times the speed. And if essentially you're running, that gives you 8 times the speed. And surprisingly, walking against it actually is twice as fast as just standing there. So, and that's always something that always seems to be, kind of always interesting. Like if you've been on an escalator and you walk with it, the fact that, you're kind of moving with everything seems to help. And I've actually kind of noticed that in the Flash movie, when he actually runs, it almost seems like he's actually just taking a lot of like his strides are insanely long, almost as though the world is essentially, kind of propelling him forward through the speed force rather than him, running and they show him like being more blurry. Then again, he's basically meant to be this lightning kind of character as well, so there are definitely rooms to act, say, room for making sense about that because it's one thing for someone for like other medias like you would see like some kind of vampire creature may seem to be move pretty quickly um, on their own, but they don't really like leave like a trail of anything. It always kind of seems like the faster you are, the more of a trail you actually have. Because um, if you're talking about someone like Quicksilver, he actually does leave bit behind of a trail that he's perceived as a blur. And even like with animated versions of like the Flash from instead the former DC universe, they do actually show him when he's running is like the animators do make him seem like he is actually pumping his arms and legs really fast, like not like he's just casually running and it's just like they do that slow wind up thing like the Bionic Man, just to cut corners, because budgets, like they do make it seem as though that he is capable, like he is actually running, but he's still using the Speed Force. And apparently, like when they saw, like, they introduced like Captain America and the Black Panther, and they showed them running. They were actually, able to kind of keep up with cars, but not so much. You couldn't actually see them. It'd be almost like when you are actually in a car, and even if you're going like 60 miles an hour, on the highway, sometimes it doesn't actually look like you're going very fast at all. If you did slow down, to barely a crawl, you do notice it. But once you kind of get into that rhythm, it's like you may not actually realize how fast you're going until the cops pull you over. Luckily, that's never happened to me. But where I actually live, we literally have a speed trap to the entrance of the neighborhood. So there definitely are some awkward issues in terms of actual super speed on their own. One is said whether it be running, I said, or flying. Um, One is definitely the fact that like with regular running, you can only go at your top speed for a very, very brief period of time, and then afterwards, you feel kind of terrible. Like the body isn't actually meant to use that. So even if you could run more than a mile, I said a mile a minute casually, you really wouldn't be able to do like an insane sprint because while there are people that can run a marathon in just under 2 hours, um, you know, you real they it's not really by that far of a margin. You realize, well, that's only about 13. It's a little more than 13 miles an hour. Yet someone like Usain Bolt would actually be able to do more than twice that in just like a 100-meter dash. So, and you never really see. It seems like if you are going to be a runner, you either are a sprinter or cross country. You can't really get that balance, for people. And so even though you might be able to breed into a horse, humans are not really meant to be, that kind of fast. So another awkward issue, if you are going to be able to run insanely fast, is you got to make sure you know how to balance yourself. If you ever try to run like in the snow or on sand, you can't really get that much traction. So you could be insanely fast, but if you get on that soft surface, you're going to lose anything. If you don't actually see there's a pretty sizable rock right beneath the surface and you accidentally trip, well, your fall is going to be that much faster. So it's one thing to basically realize that you have stepped on the rock, and there is some way to kind of do like a bunch of gymnastics flips, to catch you, but you have to be insanely quick on its own. Well, said people are always impressed when the Flash makes something very intelligent. It's actually just the fact that his brain is able to process everything a little bit quicker. Like he could be only mildly more intelligent than the average person, but instead of like needing like a pencil and paper to do some decent division or multiplication, um, essentially his mind is able to kind of process everything that quickly. So definitely would say that the world around you is still going to be happening um, at the same rate everything else is. So because in this case, when they always show like a lot of super speed characters, um, running and stuff like that, they always seem like they're able to still process the rest of the world. Like I said, like everything else is happening. Kind of like when they showed Quicksilver saving everyone in Age of Apocalypse. It would seem like when he arrived, he was just seeing the explosion there, but he was seeing like he was actually able to actually stop, actually moving, but also be faster than everything else around him. He was able to kind of process everything, realize where everyone was, to get them out. But they did kind of show him, like like moonwalking and not really moving insanely fast from our perspective. But if someone was able to perceive that thing, the rest of the world is there. But so if in this case everything may have happened in a split second in the movie, you're actually still instead a super speed character is actually perceiving everything in that time. So if something would have maybe taken like a couple minutes, to actually be processed, like for the length of the scene, you still will be processed to have that. So if you said it's almost the same thing as just aging faster than everyone else. So another thing I've always kind of noticed with kind of the problem with super speed is the fact that it too also has some very interesting limits about how fast you really want to describe it instead of describe it because yeah, if you run like just about enough as a car, they would say yes, this is does qualify as superhuman speed because characters like Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Kraven the Hunter, um, they essentially are able to achieve very good short bursts of speed on its own. Then if um, you saw an X-Men First Class, when Beast basically took off his shoes and he was actually able to get that much better traction, and he was able to kind of make it around the mansion, much faster. And he said he was still a little was maybe a little bit blurry, but he wasn't like trying to break the sound barrier um, or anything else. It's just the fact that, yes, I am faster than a regular human, but only by so much. But even then, you know, sometimes that's all maybe a character might have, as on top of something. So when they do run, they have to move as quickly as possible. I know, like a lot of vampire movies often show them being able to move pretty quickly, but sometimes, um, even if someone is just kind of trying to chase after them, they do seem to be only just faster. Just to basically let you, just to kind of tease you about the issue. And yet, they could still show the fact that, you give them like, you have that one moment and then they're halfway, so they're said halfway down the block, and you barely can see them anymore. And sometimes it's not always, insanely fast because um, a lot of people may measure speed in terms of, how many meters per second. And so, if you're talking about something like that, the Kamen Rider franchise, they always kind of say, well, this is the speed of this character. So when you divide so when you realize, how fast that essentially is, then you would actually multiply that by roughly about 2.5 times. That's how you get it. So you could essentially be able to say, okay, I can do like say able to run 10 meters, per second. That's not really, you know, said, and then realize, okay, that's only 22.5, miles an hour. So, and then, there are definitely slow riders that can't even, I mean, that through some circumstances may not even be able to do 10 meters per second, and they don't always show them actually, chasing someone uh, after, a good while, mostly because they can just summon their motorcycle. But the question is, how much are say distance do you really say can you think you ever cover? Um, and even then, there are always some issues with that because one character, Kamen Rider Fives, does get the ability to accelerate himself with a power boost from, but essentially it's moving roughly at the speed of sound, but he can only do it for 10 seconds, and he never uses it more than once at a time. And in this case, it seems like the rest of the world is moving at a very quick speed, and but he just can't do it. Unlike the characters from Kamen Rider Kabuto, which they have this clock up ability that seems to stop time for a said for a brief period to get things out of the way or do some radical changes, and then it comes back. But they can do it more than once, so it depends upon what kind of circumstances you actually have with that kind of thing. But because you never know what else might actually be available. Because one character I found by accident was called 3D Man and later Triathlon, who was essentially had the physical attributes of a PQ and ability multiplied by 3, but at the time they didn't. They said he was only based off of the 4 minute mile, and I actually kind of noticed that they say like he might have a casual speed about like 70 miles an hour, and that's actually actually being slightly adjusted because of what it actually means for having that limited degree of in heightened strength. So in theory, is that everything you may have a decent base of everything, and then that's multiplied rather than just saying okay, here's your top said here's the peak human ability times 3, good luck, because that's pretty much one of the only real powers he actually has is to run fairly quickly when he needs to, but he also has the ability to jump really high, and is probably his most interesting power is the ability to just look at any scroll and say in disguise saying you're not so and so. But the idea is just the fact that you know that is still classified as actually being super speed. So even if you were to put like some kind of ranking for what level of speed you actually have, that could always be that would have to be like the difference. So if you're like using like the Speed Force or something, you might have to call that like hyper speed, just because it's not just running blindingly fast. Like kind of like what I said with super strength. You know, I said if you have the ability to say this is what you can do under a normal adrenaline surge, and that represents the 20% that we all have. So if you were to multiply that, by 5, that would still be impressive. But if just lifting a few basic objects is exhausting for you, I said your body's going to just destroy itself trying to find any level of nutrients just to burn through everything. Because that's one of the weaknesses of the Flash is that he has to pretty much be constantly eating around the clock because his metabolism is also going there because he's also going that fast as well. This way, and yet it always seems like he can do a fair amount with just a quick snack, but you kind of have to refill the tank quite a bit because while in this case a nice luxury Hummer is might be nice to ride in, if you actually take it out on the road and even if you fill it up with the best gas possible, and I said best gas possible, and you have clear traffic, if you're not even getting 10 miles to the gallon, you're going to be having to make a lot of stops very quickly. So if you were to have some other type of energy going through you, that would make you kind of like would make you a hybrid. That would definitely would be on there, but you're still vulnerable, but you don't have to be as vulnerable as often. Because and then I actually watched a science documentary about why Superman would never be able to actually just spin the world back to reverse time, and just the fact that if he's in the upper atmosphere, um, everything is still coming at him. So he has all that air, said all the air that's up there, all the water vapor, and eventually that stuff is going to get put too much energy into anything, you know it will eventually ignite. So you're talking about going insanely high, and you could cause a chain reaction that could burn everything up. It seems like with the Speed Force, you're able to defy everything. So in theory, that you're in just in this bubble that it doesn't. It said you can still be the full-fledged hero, but less of an issue to everything around you. And sorry, and you just kind of don't know what someone else might actually have, because in theory is that Um, Superman does seem like he does have to really put in all the effort, and yet the Flash seems to be very kind of casual. I mean, not so much in a teasing kind of way, it's just like, you know, it's like it's not that big of a deal when they actually showed the trailer for the Fat Albert movie along many years ago. And they showed him actually running on this thing. He was actually keeping up with a track star, and he was just like a simple little jog and saying, "Oh, running is good exercise." But you just don't really know what exactly super speed can, what actually qualifies as a speed. And but you also have to, but things something you also have to worry about if you are leaving a trail behind you. That's always going to be an issue because you can fly, you can be a fast flyer like a member of the Lantern Corps, but they always glow when they do it. Um, so like when the say Flash or Quicksilver, those kind of advanced speedsters, they literally will leave a massive trail of energy like that of a comet's tail. So it wouldn't take very long for someone to realize where you actually are. Because and it said the series The Batman from um, early 2000s, Batman was actually able to say, okay, these are normally the trails left behind by jets. He said, however, but yet this is an area in Metropolis. He said no. It said where Superman frequents, and he essentially realizes that there are two places with the most amount of traffic. One is the Daily Planet, and the other is the apartment where Clark Kent lives. And yet it was just so while in this case you can't actually see it, the fact that he was possibly going, supersonic, sort of just below um, that level, that was enough to actually track everything. So if you have that massive trail, who knows how long that would be? Because that would always be a slight issue. When they actually had the old Cole Lyoko series, one character, Ulrich, when he was digitized, had the ability to use something called super sprint, and he was definitely running, fairly quickly for what he would do, but he had this solid yellow line right behind him, and now there really wasn't that much you could really do about not, being, stealthy, but if someone was to actually see that, enough times, and you were to use modern day cameras, it's like that's where this person calls home. But you never know what kind of, so you never know what to do. But if you're talking about some upgrades to the human body involving speed, is that one, you may actually have a greater amount of stamina to actually make sure you can run. So if you were kind of a like during the pandemic, felt like you were such a slob for not being able to get out and do much. This could actually help you get back into shape in no time. Even other times they actually show healing. It said actual healing taking place a lot faster. I'll talk a little bit more about that in another video. But in theory, if you were to break everything down, saying okay, your healing factor, so your ability to heal injuries is 4 times faster than a human, that would also be pretty impressive. I know a lot of things people would probably want to try is to run so fast they defy gravity. Basically run around a tube. Be kind of good at running over water would also be something. Just because um, jet skis, jet skis and boats are very expensive, but just the fact that you're able to kind of walk up there, say hello, and just keep going is pretty interesting. But um, but there also could be the fact that you would be able to actually hit things much harder than you normally would expect. Um, just in the fact that force is always mass times acceleration. In an episode of Teen Titans where they introduced Kid Flash, they showed him slamming down on a sidewalk, and it just pretty much exploded, um, like someone did hit it with superhuman strength. So in this case, you're also kind of talking about how they said that Bruce Lee might have been, superhuman, especially with like his, one punch, like the 1 inch punch. He's definitely putting that much greater acceleration behind him, behind his punches. But but then again, you also would say, well, he's got to be super concentrated. So concentrating, for this thing. If you have, super speed fuel, you could just slap everything it would amount to the same thing. Because if you basically say the fact that even a very small object going very fast can be quite damaging. It'd be almost like having the fact that bullets are essentially made out of lead, and which isn't a very soft material, yet they can embed themselves, quite a bit into hardwood trees, concrete, even possibly hidden metal, kind of like what bulletproof vests would be. But they could be just a very base, very soft material. So all that stuff going so fast would definitely be quite dangerous. So even then, it's just the fact that so people would say, well, how would you deal with all the kind of the damage? It's just the fact that I said all you're doing is pretty much the same thing with strength, but the idea is the fact that not many people will be able to see it. It's like stopping time, hit everything kind of quickly, and this one actually showed Quicksilver in X-Men Days of Future Past. They actually showed him just basically putting someone's finger, right up into their cheek. And to us, it didn't look like much, but the fact that it was actually, to them, it was actually moving insanely fast, seems like, you know, said is faster than anything could be perceived. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I gotta say about that. Next video will be about various types of energy abilities and kind of how they work. Probably be a lot of information to actually process because there's so many different types of energies. But I will say that it primarily would just be more about light energy, I would say. Um, so rather than shooting flames, lightning, or ice, that'll probably be for a different section all on its own. This is would just be a generic talk about all that. So hope everyone has a good one. Bye.